There's a gesture Cristiano Ronaldo made last night in Dallas that the whole world saw, and somehow nobody is breaking it down the way it actually deserves. And no, it's not the one at the final whistle. You already know that one. It's the full sequence, from what he did before kickoff to the moment the whistle blew. Watch that sequence start to finish, and it tells you more about who Cristiano Ronaldo really is than any stat, any record, any press conference headline. There's a gesture at kickoff nobody is putting in context with what came after. And there are words he said 4 days ago against Uzbekistan that, last night, became the most accidental summary of his entire World Cup career. And there's a 19-year-old kid who, without saying a single word, without one gesture, just by playing football, knocked Cristiano Ronaldo out of his final World Cup. And there's a broadcaster who said something live on air that nails exactly what a lot of people think, but nobody dares say out loud about this man's legacy in this tournament. So, what's the gesture everyone's talking about? Why is it historic? What did Cristiano say 4 days ago that suddenly landed so differently last night? How does a player with 7 goals in this tournament disappear completely in the only 2 games that actually mattered? And what does all of this say about Ronaldo's real World Cup legacy? Stay till the end, because what's coming is the most honest breakdown. You will hear about the biggest elimination of this tournament. Hit subscribe if you haven't yet. Alright, to understand Cristiano's gesture, you first have to understand what happened in the game. Because last night's match between Portugal and Spain was not the show everybody expected. It was heavyweight versus heavyweight, tight, tense, locked down, where the better team won at the hardest possible moment, but where things happened over 90 minutes that deserve to be looked at honestly. Spain started the game asleep. That's not an opinion, that's the numbers. Pedri, the player who's supposed to be the brain in the middle of Spain's midfield, the guy who, at his best, is one of the best in the world, in his position, had a first half the people who watched it are going to struggle to forget. 0 key passes, 0 big chances created, 0 duels won, 0 tackles won, and 7 giveaways. 7, in the first half of a World Cup round of 16 against Portugal. Pedri was Spain's worst player in the first half, and probably the worst player on the pitch until the break, and that's not a cheap shot. It's what the numbers say and what anyone who watched could see with their own eyes. Lamine Yamal wasn't at his level either. Nuno Mendes, Portugal's left back, beat him one-on-one all first half with a dominance that was honestly startling for a player who is supposed to be one of the best wingers on the planet. It was only when Nuno Mendes got hurt and had to come off that Lamine started to get a little more of the spotlight. And Oyarzabal, the killer of this tournament, the man with 4 goals at the World Cup, missed the clearest chance of the game in the 80th minute, one-on-one with Diogo Costa, alone in front of the keeper, and dragged it wide. A chance that, if it goes in, completely changes the shape of those 90 minutes. Portugal had their moments too. In the 41st minute, the ball smacked off Unai Simon's crossbar after a strike from Nuno Mendes at the top of the box. Spain got away with 1, and Diogo Costa made 2 huge saves on Lamine and Baena that kept it scoreless just as Spain was starting to take over. 90 minutes, 0-0, extra time looming. And that's when Luis de la Fuente made calls most managers would never make with that scoreline and that pressure sitting on them. He pulled Pedri, pulled Olmo, brought on Fabian Ruiz, brought on Mikel Merino, and brought on Ferrán Torres. What happened next is what turns this game into something bigger than a round of 16. Ferrán Torres came on and Portugal had no idea what to do with him. They couldn't pick him up, couldn't track him, couldn't stop him between the lines or in behind. In 15 minutes, he did more damage to Portugal's defense than any Spanish player had in the previous 90. He opened lanes, created overloads, stretched that back line until, in the 91st minute, the game exploded. A move that started on the left. Ferrán got it at the top of the box, lifted his head, spotted Merino's run in behind, and slid the pass into the gap. Merino arrived alone, took a touch, finished with his left past Diogo Costa, and the ball hit the net. 1-0, Spain, 91st minute. The same Merino who, at the Euros, came off the bench against Germany in the quarters and scored the goal that sent Spain to the semis. The same guy who this week admitted in a press conference that he had to come to this World Cup, leaving a newborn son back home, that he remembers all of it. The good and the bad and everything waiting for him at home, and still came on in the 85th minute of a World Cup round of 16 and settled the tie with his first touch. That's what difference makers do. Show up in the moment that matters. And that moment is exactly what Cristiano Ronaldo has spent 6 World Cups promising and never quite delivering when the level of the opponent truly demands it. But before we get to Cristiano, there's more from this game worth breaking down. Because while Pedri was disappearing and Lamine was suffering against Nuno Mendes, there was a 9-year-old doing something quiet, no headlines, no gestures, no pre-game speeches. That turned out to be the single most decisive thing in the match defensively. Pau Cubarsí, 19 years old, centre-back for Barcelona and for Spain. Pau Cubarsí did not lose a single duel against Portugal the entire game. Not one. Every ball into his zone, he won. Every aerial, he owned. Every time Cristiano Ronaldo tried to spin, to receive with his back to goal, to find that pocket inside the box that Unai Simon described in a press conference as the one place Cristiano is dangerous, it got shut down by a kid of 19 who played the game with the maturity of a 35-year-old veteran. Some people this morning are saying Cubarsí retired Cristiano from the World Cup. That's not an exaggeration, it's what happened over 99 minutes at AT&T Stadium in Arlington. A 19-year-old told one of the greatest players in the history of the game that tonight, it just wasn't happening. And Cristiano didn't. And this is where we have to talk numbers. Because Cristiano's numbers in this game, and in the only 2 knockout games he's played in this tournament, are what they are. And they deserve to be read out loud with the same clarity we'd read anyone else's. In the 2 knockout games of this World Cup, against Croatia and against Spain, Cristiano Ronaldo has played 181 minutes of football. In those 181 minutes, he touched the ball 4 times inside the opponent's box. He took 1 shot on target, won 0 aerial duels, and scored 1 goal. The penalty against Croatia, which was the only touch he got inside the box in 81 minutes of that game. That's what Cristiano Ronaldo delivered in the 2 games where Portugal actually needed him to show up. And there's more. Cristiano Ronaldo has not completed a single dribble in his last 15 games. 15. In his last 9, he hasn't even attempted one. Cape Verde's goalkeeper, Vozinha, the 40-year-old, who was collecting trash at 25, completed more dribbles at this World Cup than Cristiano Ronaldo. And Unai Simon, Spain's keeper, completed more accurate passes in this match than Cristiano did. Your goalkeeper, outpassing him. Those are the stats of the man who, 4 days ago against Uzbekistan, bundled 2 goals over the line with his body, and sprinted at the camera screaming a line that, in that moment, sounded like fire, like grit, like the Cristiano who never quits. I'm back. I'm back. That's what Cristiano Ronaldo yelled. Against Uzbekistan. Let me say that again. Uzbekistan. A team that hadn't won a single group stage game at the World Cup. A team Portugal beat 5-0. A team where Cristiano shoved 2 goals over the line with his body. The kind of ugly, do what the team needs, finish an elite 2-0-year-old getting started would knock in. And then he took off running like he just scored the World Cup winner. I'm back. And 4 days later, against Spain, he vanished. But Uzbekistan wasn't the only gesture from Cristiano this tournament that deserves to be looked at with the hindsight of what happened last night. Because at the start of the Spain game, before the ball even rolled, Cristiano Ronaldo did something in front of the cameras of the entire world that, in the moment, almost slipped by, but that now, with the result on the table, means something completely different. He covered his face with both hands and slowly pulled them apart, like a magician working a trick, like someone unveiling a surprise, like he was saying, "Here I am, ta-da, I've arrived, the show can begin." 41 years old, 6 World Cups, the biggest stage in world football, and Cristiano Ronaldo doing a theatrical little reveal like his presence alone was the main event. The pitch answered the way the pitch always answers when someone promises too much and delivers too little, with the silence of the numbers. 4 touches in the box, 1 shot on target, 0 duels won, 0 dribbles, and 99 minutes of a game Spain won with a goal from a substitute who came on in the 85th minute, and then came the final whistle, and then came the gesture everyone is talking about. Cristiano Ronaldo, 41, 6 World Cups, the man with more records than anyone in the history of Portuguese football, stayed out on the pitch after the whistle blew. He didn't head straight down the tunnel. He didn't shake the Spanish players' hands with the speed of a man who wants to disappear. He stayed on the field and he cried. Not the quiet way players cry when they're trying to hold it together and can't quite manage it. He cried the way someone cries when they know something has ended forever. When that whistle isn't the end of a match, it's the end of something far bigger. And that moment, those tears, have 2 completely different readings depending on where you're standing. The first is the emotional one. The story of a man who's given his whole life to football, who's outworked everyone, who reached 6 World Cups when most players on earth can only dream of 1, and who, in his last World Cup match, couldn't do the one thing he wanted most: win. That reading is legitimate. It's human, and nobody who understands the sport can deny there's something genuinely painful in the image of a man saying goodbye to something he's loved his entire life. But there's a second reading, and it's the one the numbers hold up. Cristiano Ronaldo has spent 6 World Cups telling the world he's the best, that Portugal can win it all, that he can carry them to the end. And in 6 World Cups, Portugal's best finish has been the quarterfinals. Portugal has never reached a semi-final with Cristiano, never reached a final with Cristiano, and the dream of winning a World Cup that he's been putting into words since 2006 is still exactly that, a dream. And meanwhile, his numbers in the knockout rounds, the only ones that truly matter, are what they are. In his entire World Cup career, in the knockout stages, Cristiano Ronaldo has scored 4 goals. 4. And in that same number of games, Mikel Oyarzabal has played in this tournament. 3 of those 4 Cristiano knockout goals are the hat-trick against Spain in 2018. The 4th is the penalty from 4 days ago against Croatia. Take away the Spain hat-trick, and Cristiano has 1 goal in his entire World Cup knockout career, a penalty in 4 games. That's the man who was crying on the pitch in Dallas last night. And here we have to talk about something that happened during the game that summed up perfectly what this tournament is and what Cristiano Ronaldo is as a public figure. The Spanish TV commentator calling the game live made a slip that, in any other context, would just be a professional working under pressure. He called Diogo Costa Diogo J. At one point in the match, Diogo J., the Portuguese winger who died in a car accident just a few months ago, a young player with his whole career ahead of him who never got to see this World Cup. A live error, the commentator corrected instantly, but that hung in the air, the way those things do when they happen at the worst possible moment. Because this Portugal World Cup has always carried that shadow. The shadow of a team that arrived here missing one of its best players, that paid tribute to Diogo J. in the game against Croatia, that carried that emotional weight all tournament, and that tonight in Dallas watched its 4-1-year-old captain cry on the pitch after his last World Cup match. There's something in all of that goes beyond football, and there's something in Cristiano's numbers that also goes beyond football. but in the opposite direction, because this World Cup has produced a comparison nobody can ignore anymore. Messi is 39 at this tournament, the same Messi that media has spent months saying is at the end of his career. The same Messi they line up next to Cristiano as if they're equals. At this point in their lives, Messi has 7 goals at this World Cup against serious opponents, against a Norway side that knocked out Brazil, sitting as top scorer of the tournament alongside Haaland. And Cristiano has 7 goals at this World Cup. Against Uzbekistan, 5-0. Against Congo, against the weakest teams in the group. Same numbers, same age, same stage of their careers, and the pitch saying 2 completely different things about each of them. That's what Cristiano's tear in Dallas can't change this morning, because the tears are real, the pain is real, the love for the game is real, but the numbers are real too, and the numbers say, Cubarsí, at 19, played his best game of the tournament last night against the greatest finisher in the history of the sport and didn't give him a single sniff. That Ferrán Torres, coming off the bench in the 75th minute, did more damage to Portugal in 15 minutes than Cristiano did in his entire World Cup knockout career. That Merino, with a newborn son back home, came on in the 85th minute and scored the goal that sends Cristiano Ronaldo home for good. And that Unai Simon, the keeper who described Cristiano as a player who's decisive the moment he steps in the box, finished the game with 478 minutes without conceding a goal at World Cups, without Cristiano troubling him once. In the 99 minutes the game lasted. That's what happened last night in Dallas, and that's the gesture Cristiano Ronaldo will carry whenever he remembers this night. Not covering his face at kickoff, not screaming "I'm back" against Uzbekistan. It's crying on the pitch in Dallas while Spain celebrated, and he said goodbye to the World Cup, the only way he could, without ever having won one. Drop your take in the comments. Is Cristiano's World Cup legacy actually living up to what he himself has promised for 20 years? Can his knockout stage numbers really back up the story that he's one of the greatest ever on the biggest stages? And do you think Cubarsí, at 19, just proved he's got what it takes to be the best centre-back in the world? In the next video we break down Spain's full picture heading into the quarters, who plays, who sits, and whether Pedri deserves to keep his starting spot after what he did last night in the first half. Don't miss it. Smash that like if you think Cristiano's World Cup legacy hasn't lived up to his own promises. Subscribe if you haven't yet, and turn on the bell. Spain are in the quarterfinals. Cristiano Ronaldo is home for good, and football, as always, said everything without saying a single word. And before we close, there's something worth breaking down with the depth it deserves, because in this whole conversation about Cristiano and his gestures and his numbers, there's one thing that defines his World Cup career better than anything else: the contrast with everything around him. In this very tournament, at 41, Cristiano Ronaldo has watched Erling Haaland score 7 goals and become the most feared player in the tournament. He's watched Messi, at 39, lead Argentina with a football exhibition that's left analysts around the world speechless. He's watched a goalkeeper, a 40-year-old from Cape Verde, who was collecting trash at 25, create more emotional impact and complete more successful dribbles than he did all tournament. And he's watched a 19-year-old kid from Barcelona shut the door on him in his final World Cup game, with the ease of someone playing a training exercise. That's what football has said about Cristiano Ronaldo in this tournament, not what he's said about himself, not the theatrical gestures before games, not the "I'm back" against Uzbekistan, not the 7 goals that sound impressive until you look at who they came against. What football has said is that when the level of the opponent rises to the point where there are no shortcuts left, when there's no Uzbekistan or Congo to bundle the ball past in the net, when the other side has a 19-year-old Cubarsí who doesn't lose a duel and a Unai Simon who knows exactly when and how he can be dangerous, Cristiano disappears. And that's the summary that's left from this World Cup for the man who spent 20 years building a story of himself as the greatest in the history of football. It's not a moral judgment, it's not a personal attack, it's what the numbers say and what the pitch confirmed last night in Dallas. And there's one last thing worth remembering, to put all of this in perspective. Cristiano's hat-trick against Spain in 2018. 3 goals. A spectacular game, the one moment in his entire World Cup knockout career where Cristiano Ronaldo truly showed up when the opponent was at his level. That hat-trick exists, nobody takes it from him. It's probably his best performance at a World Cup. And it's only fair to say so, but that hat-trick was 8 years ago, and since then, across 4 more knockout games, Cristiano has scored 1 penalty against Croatia on his only touch inside the box. 8 years, and 1 penalty, while the world waited for the second hat-trick, while he promised he was back. While he covered his face in front of the cameras in Dallas like his arrival on the pitch was the show itself. The pitch said, no. And Cubarsí, 19, no gestures, no theatrics, no promises, just playing football, told him the same thing. Tonight, Cristiano Ronaldo cried in Dallas, and football moved on. Spain to the quarters, Messi to the quarters, Haaland to the quarters. The most thrilling tournament in years, rolling on without the man who spent 20 years promising he'd win it all. The tears are real. The World Cup legacy is real too, and the two together form the most honest picture this tournament has produced of who Cristiano Ronaldo is when the opponent is at his level and the promises have to be kept out on the pitch. And there's one more dimension to all of this worth breaking down before we close, one that connects what happened last night to something much bigger than a round of 6 game. The debate over who's the greatest of all time. A debate that's been the center of every football conversation for 20 years, that split locker rooms, families, and bars all over the world, that's generated more headlines, more controversy, and more arguments than any other topic in the history of this sport, and that this World Cup is answering more clearly than it ever has. Messi is 39, 7 goals, leading Argentina, and on the road to the quarterfinals. Cristiano has 7 goals against weak teams, 0 dribbles in 9 games, and the tears of Dallas. It's not a fair comparison in terms of the sporting situation. Argentina and Portugal arrived at this tournament with very different squads. Cristiano doesn't have the players around him that Messi has. That's real, and it has to be acknowledged. But the debate isn't about the teams, it's about the players. And what football has said this tournament is that at 39, Messi is still the best player on the pitch when his team needs him to show up, and that at 41, Cristiano has stopped being that player when the opponent is good enough that his qualities no longer work the same way. Nobody said that in a press conference, no analyst said it, no outlet said it. It was said by the pitch in Dallas, with a 19-year-old Cubarsí winning every duel. With Ferrán Torres coming off the bench and deciding the game in 15 minutes, with Merino scoring from the goal line with his first touch, with Unai Simon finishing the game on 478 minutes unbeaten, and with Cristiano crying at the end, not because he failed more than in other games, but because for the first time in a long time there was no Uzbekistan to bundle it past, no Congo to overrun. No kind of opponent that lets him do what lets him still be Cristiano Ronaldo at this stage of his career. There was Spain, with Cubarsí and Unai Simon and Merino and Ferrán Torres, and Spain told him, this far and no further. That's what happened last night in Dallas, and that's the end of the World Cup story of Cristiano Ronaldo. Not the "I'm back against Uzbekistan," not the theatrical gesture at kickoff. The tears on the field of an AT&T stadium that was celebrating Merino's goal while he said goodbye to the one thing he could never win. And there's one final piece from last night that hasn't gotten the attention it deserves, but that, in the context of everything we've broken down today, fits perfectly. Spain finished this game without conceding a single goal, the 5th game in a row this tournament without an opponent scoring on them. 5 games, 0 goals against. and Unai Simon, the keeper, who in a press conference described Cristiano as a player who's decisive the moment he steps in the box, a player you have to keep out of it, added one more chapter last night to a record that's already historic. Adding the minutes from Qatar 2022 to this tournament, Unai Simon has gone longer without conceding at a World Cup than any goalkeeper in the history of the competition. And that stat carries an extra layer when you read it in the context of last night. The keeper with the all-time record for World Cup shutouts up against the player who promised that the moment he stepped in the box he'd be decisive. 99 minutes, 4 touches from Cristiano in the box. 0 real shots, 0 goals. Unai Simon's record survived Cristiano Ronaldo. Just like Cubarsy's defending, he survived. Like De La Fuente's system survived. Like all of Spain survived everything Portugal and Cristiano could throw at them in the biggest game of the tournament so far. That's what's left of last night. Spain in the quarterfinals, Unai Simon with his record intact, Cubarsí at 19, having played probably his best game of the tournament. Merino with the most important goal of his life. Ferrán Torres redeeming a World Cup that until last night had been quiet for him. And Cristiano Ronaldo with his tears, with his opening gesture, with his "I'm back" against Uzbekistan, with his 4 touches in the opponent's box across the only 2 games that mattered, and with football telling him what football always tells you when the promises don't line up with the facts, that the pitch doesn't lie, that no theatrical gesture counts for anything in front of Cubarsí, and that sometimes the most honest story of a tournament isn't written by the guy who talks the most before the games, it's written by the guy who works the most inside them. But before the final word, there's one more thing worth putting on the table, something that defines who Cristiano Ronaldo is better than any stat, when the words and the actions get placed side by side. Cristiano Ronaldo is the king of contradictions. And we don't say that as an insult, we say it as a statement of what he himself has said over the years and what he did afterward. A few years back, when there was speculation about his future, Cristiano was crystal clear in several interviews. He said he didn't want to end his career in Saudi Arabia, in Qatar, or in the United States, that it wasn't a dignified way to finish, that he deserved better than going to a second-tier league to collect a paycheck without competing for the biggest trophies in the world. That a player of his level had to finish competing at the highest level, that going to the Gulf leagues was the option for players who could no longer hack it in Europe's top divisions, and then came the summer of 2023, and Cristiano Ronaldo went to Saudi Arabia, to Al Nassr. And in that league, in 4 seasons, he won absolutely nothing for 3 years. 14 trophies up for grabs. 14 losses. The player who'd crowned himself the greatest of all time, who'd said he didn't want to end up in a league without a level, grinding away in a competition where he couldn't even win the most basic domestic trophies, until last year, when he won his first title, one after 3 seasons. That's what Cristiano chose after saying he didn't want to end his career in Saudi Arabia. And then there's the other contradiction, the one that stings the most in the context of last night. Years ago, Cristiano said something that, at the time, sounded like a winner's mindset, like a champion's cold focus. He said the World Cup, it is just 7 games, that there's no need to be dramatic, that it's only 7 games and life goes on after. 7 games. So what are you doing crying at the end of 7 games? And last night, after losing the last of those 7 possible games in his final World Cup, Cristiano Ronaldo cried on the field in Dallas for several minutes. He has every right in the world to cry. The emotions are real. Saying goodbye to something you've loved your whole life deserves tears. But if the World Cup is just 7 games, why was he crying? And if the great players don't head to second-tier leagues to finish their careers, why has he spent 4 years in Saudi Arabia? Those questions don't have an answer Cristiano can give without contradicting himself. And that contradiction, that distance between what he says and what he does, between the image he builds and the reality the pitch shows, end of his World Cup career, and ending with theatrical gestures at kickoff, with "I'm back" against Uzbekistan, and with tears in Dallas after a 19-year-old kid told him the 7 games of this tournament were already over for him. Yeah,